Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Nature Folklore. It's the 2nd of October, 2022. Well, thank you all for joining me here for our weekly sessions of exploring nature-centered folklore, connecting this to your favorite sanctuary space and expressing inspired visions from your sanctuary through your poetry, writing, arts, crafts, performance, and problem solving. Now, this is the second of 8 nature folklore editions that are leading up to Sawan or Savan, whichever way you say it. And this is the second. I'm going to get rid of my face for a moment because this is the second of a 3-part series, Witches, Cauldrons, and Ales. And that picture came up too quickly, and I'll bring myself back again. There we go. There's no guest this week. I still got to send out invitations to get guests back on with us. But really, I'm trying to make this show less than an hour today, and I do have a lot to share with you through photographs and the subject as well. But we'll have a guest with poems and stories, lovely interviews coming up very soon, especially with Sawan, because a lot of people write and have great stuff to share with us then. And as usual, these nature folklore sessions, the videos, the tree and water sanctuary support that we do, they're brought to you due to the kind support of you kind subscribers. And without your subscription help, I couldn't fund putting on the show to share with you today or any Sunday and Wednesday now. So thank you for your help. Now, to subscribe to Nature Folklore, that's as usual, the main link, that's the Patreon link there. And Patreon do work through PayPal, and that's their payment platform. If you're not too happy about that, there's also the Buy Me a Coffee. You get that lovely rolling banner up as well. There we go, the Buy Me a Coffee. And you can just use a regular card with that one. So that's fantastic, helping out with $1, euro, or £1 or more, when they're all pretty much equal value now, aren't they? Goes a long way to keeping the show afloat with several of you helping out. So thank you for that, and a few more would help so I can cover the expenses. Thank you very much for that. So let's see who's with us. There's 1 or 2 people making comments here. There's the lovely Susan Samuel there. Hello, darling. Lovely to be watching on this sunny autumn day. We did have some sun here over here at Liston Allen, but it's clouding over now. So good to see the sun is over some people there. Beautiful. And then on another side of the country there, Penny Stevenson also having a sunny afternoon at Buckhurst Hill on the edge of Epping Forest. So that's a lovely start. A couple of lovely people, at least. Actually, by the signal I got on board here, there's a few more of you around. So that's lovely. Thanks very much. Right, I'll get rid of that banner. I think you're familiar with it now. And, well, it isn't going away, is it? Right. So here we go. And let's get started. First with a brief recap of from part 1 last Sunday. It's the best way of, if you haven't seen it, to catch up on what I'm going to be talking about, go to the YouTube archives if you can. It's easier to follow up from there. But anyway, I covered early archaeological studies of women and brewing, and that included the archaeologists' findings of evidence from about 2000 BC in Iran. That's what we got there. That's earliest that's known. And within those ancient scripts, is the description of the role of women being called alehouse wives when it's actually translated out. And there's ancient women in Iran. That was my background figure last week, wasn't it? And that's the ancient scribing there. And one of my computers has just gone down. And anyway, from that early Persian description, plus an inspiration I had from an alehouse song recorded by the late Martin Bennett, I've been attempting to put fragments and pieces together to discover what an alehouse wife is and how she has spread through the cultures, especially West. I've been focusing on the West, and that's definitely heading west there. Now, it strongly seems that the alehouse wives, the alehouse women traditions, they spread west through various clans, tribes, and all the cultures that they changed into over thousands of years, really. And this has included skirting around the patriarchal culture of the ever expanding Roman Empire and eventually being revered by the northern tribes of the Viking tribes, the Saxons, the Angles, the Jutes, the Danes, and other Norse people. And of course, especially the men. And the alehouse woman to those cultures wasn't like a patriarchal takeover like with the Romans. It seemed like these women, they were like goddesses or even were goddesses to these Viking men. So that's, I don't know why that came up. But anyway, that's just showing some Viking brewing there. That's quite nice. And there's a Viking man having a good old bevy there after the sort of goddesses brewing there. And that's another goddess image that I showed you last week. Now, through this alehouse wife tradition, eventually it did enter into a cruel, dark history for women. Very sad, but going to be talking more about that next week and how that was amazingly resolved. But before this happened, I would like to explore the evolving alehouse wives through the medieval centuries. That's why this is called Medieval Momentum is the title of today and what I'm going to be talking about. So that's what the edition's called. So let's set the scene again. For thousands of years among human existence, it seems there's been a huge unfillable demand for alcoholic beverages and spirits from us humans that are urged to consume this. And it's assumed to be a bit of an addiction. Maybe it is so much now, but it was very much for health reasons. Back in the past, the making, trade, and supply of alcoholic drinks, it seemed through much of the history, was by women, and most of their customers were the men. Now, this evening, I'm getting more local actually with this, because I'm going to focus on Ireland and what is now the UK. Plus maybe a bit of Europe, and maybe I will squeeze in a bit of the culture of the Eastern USA and how it got over there. So there's a few of you have come on board since I've been chatting. We got Jane Gilgan here, who's lovely, one of our huge sponsors. Lovely to have you on board, Jane. And here's Chandler as well. Good morning from East Tennessee, who's had some really big adventures this summer. And looking forward, I think there's more poems on the way, especially Sawan poems coming up. So lovely to have you on board. Thanks very much for joining us. Right, now, alehouse tradition, yeah, that seemed to have arrived with the Angles, Saxons, the Jute traditions. I explained how and why last Sunday, and I also introduced how brewing is part of the legends. Surprisingly, because Claire called me up about this to talk about it, included in part the legends and mythology of Bridget of Kildare. And let's get a Bridget one. If you're not familiar, that's the idol of her at the Tully Well at Kildare. So I'm sure a lot of you have visited. And because other stories I've heard, I also suspect the presence of a form of alehouse wives during the Iron Age and also the earlier Bronze Age, the Tuatha De Danann era. But I'm going to think about and talk about the alehives in Saxon times. And that's kind of an illustration, line illustrations inspired by that. And for many women doing this during those ancient years, it was the creation and distribution of alcoholic beverages. It seemed to be a sound alternative for them, perhaps the only alternative to being under a culture of slavery, which women very much were so once in the later Saxon years. That seemed to be unfortunately one of the side effects of the spread of Christianity, the way that it was made into an order. And that's what I'm going to focus on much more during this session this afternoon. And the Saxon influence most likely arrived in Ireland from women who were actually captured by Irish slave traders, and they were brought in from raids to Britain, probably along the south coast territories. The Saxons. I think I've got a bit of a map. There we go. That's kind of gives you the sort of Saxon regions, and the Irish at the time, best thing to say, they were slave traders. They would sort of drag women over to what is now Ireland from there. Now, from these captured women, the children would have been born on this island, and they must surely have learned the alehouse wives' craft, because I assume as soon as they got over to here and the value of their brewing was understood, suddenly they got into that independent situation again. That's what I gather. Anyway, that's my theory on that one. There's a couple of more people who have joined in. We got Amy Dixon, I think that is right. Amy Dixon, hello from Elora, Ontario. And there's Jane, Jamestown in Rhode Island. There she is there. Rhode Island might come into more next week as well. We'll touch on that. Anyway, during the early medieval times, 5th century, that's probably the beginning of it, really. It seems that these alehouse women, they were successful in setting themselves up in wicker. It was quite a poverty situation. They set themselves up in wicker kind of houses, probably hazel branch, something like this, with hides and thatch. And that would have been certainly near a well, because wells were the water source. They didn't have faucets and taps then, so this would have been set up. And this would have been, the huts were probably like large sweat lodges, as you can see there, made initially as roundhouse frames, and then they got, later on, they moved on to more square ones. That's how they started, sort of a poverty, framed with hazel sticks, covered with hides, barley straw thatch maybe. I'm going to show some barley straw thatch a bit later. It's really whatever they could gather. So you've got something like this. Oh yeah, this is something like you got something like this. That's a later early medieval, as I say, slightly square. These are actually modern interpretations, but there you go. It's a good sort of straw cover, straw gathered from excuse me, from the harvest of being threshed. That they might have been part of as well, because they need that threshed barley in order to make to malt the barley in order to start the brew up, to make the mash for the brew. So it's all part of what they needed. Although the men, that might have been an exchange too, I wouldn't be surprised, is that in exchange for doing the roof like that, the men got their ale. And that because there wasn't coins in the pockets, there weren't bank accounts. So I imagine there was a lovely barter around that. And then later on, I think they probably got onto something a bit like this, a bit more advanced. And the huts got stronger, they became more durable. And these brewing huts, they would have been needed to be positioned, as I say, beside very active spring wells, which we tend to call holy wells today. And if you've been joining in the Holy Welsh revival, I've explained how the word holy came over with the Saxons rather than the Christian people, as being, in a way, talking about something that was healing and complete, and also filtered. There was a description of filtering and purifying. But no water, no brewing. So that's why they're beside the well. And in part one, I explored the possibility that I think between the connection of the early alehouse wives and the ancient full of flour sites. Do I have a full of flour? Yeah, let's try this picture. And I was talking about that. That's what they're like. You could see the well on the left there. There's the full of flour pit there. I'm not going to go into it now, but if you watch part one, I explained how I feel that this worked in as far as brewing is concerned, because it would they were skilled, these alehouse wives were skilled at capturing the natural yeast. Anyway, as I say, recommend catching that up. And sorry, I've not inserted the chapter marks on YouTube yet. hopefully I will get to that, because people have been asking, like, could I put in the chapters so that if you've got a couple of minutes to spare, you know which chapter you want to get to. I'll do that as soon as I can. It's just one of these fitting in the time things, of course. So the alehouse women, and with their breweries, their brewing, their water needs, must have surely conjured up our folklore of wise women keepers of the well, serving us with herbal mixes, potions, and tonics, as the stories tell. And the mixes may have been ground up in the bolon stones. If you've been around Ireland, you see these beside many wells. This one, unfortunately, is gone. This was the one at Keju, which they stupidly have put onto a concrete pedestal, and they've actually, that whole stream coming from the well, they put a kind of a conduit through, you know, because health and safety. You know, they're worried about people falling in the water. So that's a shame that they mess around with that. Then let's see. I think I've got some more. This is a tractor's well. They call that the Dragon's Head, but that's actually a bolon pits there, and there's the stones above it, which have been cemented in, and that's what would have been used for the grinding. And just to throw that in, here's some well women there. Whether they were brew women, I don't know, but they were certainly, their activities would have been very close. And there's a photograph with some explanation of the various components. So it's great to bring all that up as well. Anyway, I mentioned last Sunday about ale brewing also being one of the traditions of the women. As I say, I've already said that. It became one of the things that was of St. Bridget's tradition is lesser known. Here's another one. I think this is the picture I showed. Yeah, that's what I showed last week. So that's Bridget's breeder's lesser known skill amongst the healing poetry and smithcraft. Though if you think about it, I think the brewing also fits into the healing category very well as well, because as I pointed out last week, that really a herbalist can't be a herbalist without the skills of brewing, distillation, concentration. All the stuff that's needed in brewing ales is also needed really in effective herbalism, because especially with the ancient herbalists, it was a lot to do with gut health, because the gut's regarded as almost being like our second brain. The way our brain functions is parallel to how our gut functions. And the original origin of ales was to improve gut health, not like the brews today, which tears up gut health. Totally different. Their brews were very different. So the two are very intertwined. So Bridget was certainly, people think, oh, she goes off and has a crack with the men. No, it's just part of the herbalism. So that's probably why it's not outlined as a fourth skill of Bridget. Anyway, I wouldn't be surprised that at the monastery, the Bridget monasteries, so they're probably the nuns, or what you would call them, her followers. I'm sure they would have had a brewing hut at the perimeter, at least at the perimeter of their monastery. And beside the well, maybe what's called the Bridget's Well now, would have been extremely important to them. And also an essential connecting point with the people living nearby or passing by. Maybe the men may be coming on pilgrimages, trying to chat them up. If the storytelling says the men were brought to the scriptoriums, maybe that's how they recruited men into the scriptoriums. But people on pilgrimage, I'm sure, as well. That's actually a well that's north of Ballina. That's Moya's well. St. Moya, that's north of Ballina. It's famous for its fairy tree, hawthorn tree growing out of the roof. But I think that gives us a nice bit of imagery. What if there was actually a hut over a well? It'd be very difficult to actually do brewing and welling in that one. But I think it emphasizes that imagery of living by the well. That's why I brought that up. I couldn't find any more suitable pictures to tell that bit with. Anyway, another belief of mine is that I feel that much of the traveler culture, the travelers talking about the tinkers here, gypsies say in Europe, that much of the traveller culture and tradition may have commenced with the offspring of these alehouse wife women. And I've talked about this on the Holy World's Revival show, and I'm going to talk about it a lot more, the traveller connection, as much as I can. So I've got this one up. There you go. There's a traveller by the well, I believe that is, and because of the strong associations. You don't see travellers at wells so much now. They're more settled, and they've got taps and faucets, and wherever they settle their homes. You don't see them at the well so much. I used to go to the wells and they'd be filling up their containers and sharing stories and hello. Yeah, it was a little bit of a nice crack. Of course, they were a little bit shy because I was a settled person, but it was great to see them there. So anyway, I'll talk more about that on Wednesdays. But the alehouse wives, really, they had the skills to make dough, bake bread, plant and grow herbs, farm grains, ground grains, boiled the ingredients in their large back cauldrons, making their mash for the brewing and for later distilling as well. And these women's cauldrons, they were eventually that's their spell makers. They could do anything with these cauldrons. And that was their main tool for breaking away from any enslavement and actually turning around the tables of the men versus women tables by the skills of the cauldron, the start of the cauldron. Now, ancient women discovered that through their cauldrons, they could do so much to satisfy the seemingly unlimited demand for alcoholic beverages by the men. Now, it's told that the beer and ales that were created and drunk instead of water back then, as I remind what I said last week, it was due... there's a picture hasn't got. Yeah, let's try that. I've showed the cauldron. Anyway, I've shown the beer and ales were created and drunk instead of water because even back then in ancient times when they were settling down, they were doing agriculture, there was a runoff from that, and their local water, it was hard to find safe water. So the wells, the spring wells, natural spring wells where the water's pumped up from deep down, was the safest water. And as these alehouse women ended up more or less in a way becoming the guardians and gatekeepers for these wells, and in fact, they were the ones that probably ordered in later times, Christian times, you only get a drink of this water if you do your Hail Marys and Our Fathers and so forth. I think that came from their alehouse culture anyway. So they pretty much had the license access to these spring wells just because brewing had so much power that they could hold, and it spread to the water as well. But ale was probably conceived, first of all, not as a means of getting drunk and being stupid, but as a potential health tonic, as I say, great for the gut, rather than something merry to have fun with. As I said last week, most of this ale was less than 3% alcohol, which in the UK, I think, is still the legal limit for any children. That's its own, they only have to be 18, is it, if the alcohol is over 3%. It's funny, years ago, there was a beer Watney's, I think it was Watney's Red Barrel, that was 3.5%, just 5% above what a child could buy, which was very funny. Anyway, as I say, there was suspect water back in those ancient times, and ale was perhaps the first basics of ancient herbal medicine because of its safety with water and great for health therapy, much better than teas and decoctions. And brewing water with plants also, that purifies water, it adds nutrition, and then add the additional fermentation and to those plants, because the brewing by these ancient women, it wasn't just with hops. They would use all kinds of material. The hops was great. Certainly the barley was always the useful thing, but in August, the heather, there would be dandelions as well, and all kinds of plants. So there would be different brews as well, just like what perhaps a herbalist and a home brewer does now. Now, the very important tool for these alehouse women to the cauldron, sink to the cauldron, was a broom. And there we go, a broom sticking out of a modern alehouse there, out of an inn. obviously in Germany. Now, the entrance is to their huts, and that's why I've got on the background here that they had the broom. They would stick the broom out, and there we go. And when they stick the broom out, like here, that's another picture of that. In the early days, they had a sort of a leather or a woven door, and eventually they managed to upgrade to wooden doors. But either above these entrance doors or maybe sticking out from above the lintel, there we got the broomstick there. And I'll take that away, and you can see, I think I've got that picture. I got another variation there. It is the broomstick there. You can see that. So when that's broomstick sticking out, and I've knocked one picture ahead there, the broomstick was the alehouse woman's symbol to let the passers-by know that she's got a brew that's ready to be served. If you got something to exchange for that, it is. And when the broomstick was outside the hut, this was actually showing that the alehouse woman was open for business. So why use a broomstick? Here we go, open for business again. So why use a broomstick as an open sign? Well, for one, very few people passing by could actually read the word open. I think it was as simple as that. And the preparing of ingredients for a brew and the bubbling brew itself, it's a very messy experience. If you prepared a large amount of brew, especially for mash, blah, blah, it's amazing how much mess you can make with all that stuff. So I expect the alehouse woman, before inviting people in for a brew, she's so proud of her housekeeping skills. During the brewing, she would have lined her floor with rushes, straw, maybe sawdust before production, and that's what the picture was I had earlier. So you would line the floor something like that, and this was to hold all of the mess that was spilled. And then after that was done, she would get the broom. After the brew was ready, when she was ready for people to come in and sample the brew, floor swept clean with the broom, tidy the house, be ready for the customers, and then the broom hung outside to say, "I'm ready, I'm open," even though you can't read the open side. And she may have also put down fresh straw and sawdust to the floors to capture the new mess that's caused by the customers. And here's a modern version in a pub. It used to be very common. There's footprints all over that one. But I remember in rural pubs in England and Scotland during the 50s and the 60s, the early 60s, and the men would say to their wives, just taking the dog for a walk. And what that meant, it was going straight down to the pub with the dog. And then if the dog peed on the bar floor, there was the sawdust to collect the pee. So that was it sounds messy now. You wouldn't get that in a wine bar or a bar now, but that's how it was in the 50s. Bars were full of peeing dogs and sawdust with peeing customers maybe as well. So I mentioned that these earliest alehouses were in remote locations and by sacred springs. And it seems these alehouse women boldly appointed themselves, as I pointed out, to be spring and well keepers. Let's see if I can. There we go. There's another well keeper there. She could well be an alehouse woman as well, I suppose. And through stories told, it's said that they would lure any well water visitors into where the brew is, into their home, their hut, and lure them to purchase some ale. And it seems that men never bullied these women. Sorry. They never wrecked. There's no stories of these men coming along and beating them up and wrecking their brewing establishment, because they knew if they did that, there was no more future ale. Sorry for the voice loss again. So, and also not only future ale, of course, these men here, over the years, I say 3%, actually the brewing, these women got onto something and knew the men wanted something a little bit stronger, and they did brew a bit stronger. They were into distilling, and there would be chasers, I think, all this sort of stuff. So this whole herbal side of things was sort of making way for inebriation, because if they're inebriated, the more is traded. And of course, sexual favors became part of that as well. But these women, they were alehouse wives, and they were still in very much in charge of that. So to get more trade, these alehouse women, they used to go to the village as well. They didn't just rely on the passers-by. They would go to the village and nearest small-town markets when their brew was ready to sell or trade. How they could leave it behind and not be stolen, I don't know. Maybe the cat was vicious, something like that. That part of the story, I don't know. But anyway, how did they announce that brew was ready in the market? Well, they actually stood in the marketplace. And what were they wearing? Was this. No, that's another picture. That doesn't seem my pictures have come up. Boo-hoo. Oh, these are valuable pictures. Give me a moment. These are very important pictures I've got to show up. It's like you've sort of got the tagline, and the tagline has disappeared on you. So these are the tagline pictures, because I'll repeat that again. Why they didn't come up, I do not know, because this is very essential picturing. We were going so well as well, because I was really having problems with pictures last week, wasn't I? So I'll just get these up for you. Just take me a moment. No, it's hang on. No, it's not messing me up again, is it? No. Oh dear. Okay, I'll take a chance. Let's see if we can get on this. Yeah, this will do. This is what I was trying to show you. This was a punchline. I think I'll go over it again a bit. To get more trade. What did these alehouse wives do to get more trade? Because they couldn't rely on the passers-by. So what they did is they stood in the marketplace. And they weren't just saying, they weren't shouting out, "Oh, my brew's ready, my brew's ready." That would have caused problems from mid to late medieval times. So this is how they were. This is the giveaway. They were in pointy hats. And that was what the whole pointy hat of these later witches is all about. It shows them that they are the brewer. They are the alehouse wife. Watch where she is. Gather round close to her. And at one point, she'll be like the Pied Piper. Off she'd go, and all the men would be following her, the potential customers that gathered in the market, because they're off to get the brew. And this really started early medieval, 5th century, but it didn't take long before they had to really disguise themselves on that. So they all these men will follow her to the alehouse, and they will trade with her to get her latest wares from a cauldron. Now, next, I'm going to talk about the eventual alehouse wives, the children, and I accidentally showed that picture up by mistake earlier. Let's see what you're saying at the moment. We got Kate here. How are you doing, Kate? Wedgerson, hello, John. Thank you for a great nature folklore. I'm enjoying in Colorado. Kindly, Kate. Great, fantastic, lovely, indeed. So now, of course, a lot of as you can imagine, in this situation, a lot of these alehouse women, they were single parents, and but they had children perhaps born from husbands. Quite commonly, they were born from husbands that, unfortunately, when we talk about enslavement, the women escaped their enslavement, because as it is today, and we're seeing a bit of it, unfortunately, in Russia, that men, they were easily enslaved by their kings, their governments. Well, there wasn't governments at this time. It was all kings and chieftains. And the husbands would be dragged out to sea, dragged off to war, even dragged off hunting. And so the women there themselves, and when I tell tales of British time, this comes up as well. So the women there are at the mercy of becoming enslaved also by the instructions of the chieftains, the kings, etc., while the men were away. And it's through being these alehouse women that they could actually have a stand of independence and demand, that men wouldn't, men that could pass away, that weren't out at sea, weren't out at war, they depend on their brew. Anyway, a lot of them, they would have had husbands that were being enslaved, sent out to sea, sent off to war, blah, blah. under the servitude of the king and country, blah, blah. But these alehouse women, some of them, their children were obviously born from the lusty encounters I indicated earlier from their paying customers. So you would have got children from both resources, I suppose I would say. Anyway, these alehouse wives, they never sent their children to school because the brewing and all things related to their cauldron and the kitchen, that was the children's learning apprenticeship, and quite appropriate too, really. If they sent children off to school, that would have meant these alehouse wives would have needed to employ other people to assist satisfying what was a constantly growing demand for their brewed wares. Now, the children of these alehouse wives, these wives bore, they were automatically employed into brewing endeavors as soon as possible. They were given their chores and as young as possible. And let's get back to see if I've got pictures coming up again. I hope so. They're kind of hiding from me. Come on, pictures. There we go. And I showed the young brewer. There we go. We got one young brewer there, an artist's impression. But also it was both sons and daughters that became part of it all. They didn't just have daughters, so the whole lot got into them. Now, for most of these alehouse women, employing others, it just wasn't affordable. Or if they could eventually afford to employ people, just like today, in a way, the employed people probably couldn't be as trusted just like their children could be. So there was an honesty question there as well. Now, as the children grew older and stronger, their work contributions to their mother's brewery would increase because their abilities and the way to think and their creative thinking would have increased and their strength. And that meant that the brewery as a whole became a family business, so they could produce a lot more. And because they were producing a lot more, the mothers and the children, the alehouse women could actually upgrade. They would be able to replace their basic sweat lodge style premises into being something greater, almost like a tavern. No, that's a more modern thing, but this is, increase the size of the building. And this is what was happening. They could have expand into a wooden hut or a lodge. Could be a turf brick lodge like that, but eventually a stone one or wooden one, so they could do something like this. So the alehouse women, we're getting into mid to later medieval times. This is what was happening. There was no longer so much the little gathering place by the wells. But these larger places, well, it also meant, there were stone ones too. That would be fairly typical of an intermediate one they could have had as an alehouse. That wasn't an alehouse, but just give you the image. But larger premises, it meant they could construct bars, leaning bars, and that people could gather around, because once you got the bar and they were making the brew stronger, that means more drink is drunk at the bar and sold. It's all about increased trade, and eventually the additional profits from the bar was invested into building even a larger building that could be converted into spaces for people to sleep. Because, again, people with a stronger brews, they get drunk and so forth, they can't go home. I actually had someone banging on the door here who'd just been at the Locker Inn Hotel up the road, was looking for a bed, couldn't get home, and was banging on my door in the middle of the night asking, because this used to be a B&B building. But anyway, so that still goes on, looking for a bed rather than go home. So the alehouse became an inn where passing travelers could sleep, and those who became legless from drink could sleep as well. And maybe add to that some extra space for bathing. That's an extra service. And so they could charge a bit more for having the hot water available for the extra fee. All these things added on from the meager little shelter of the alehouse. So anything you've got to say about that? Any questions, any experiences on that? Just type them in. Let me know. It'd be great to chat on that as much as I can. So did these alehouse wives become wealthy? Again, they didn't have currency. They didn't have not coin currency or paper currency. They certainly didn't have bank accounts, not as such. So all these alehouse wives, they really started within a beggar culture, but they were in charge. And their living was a fringe escape from slavery, as I say. They brewed their ales, made distillations from their ales, traded access to them on the streets with the pointy hats, and lured men to their supplies. Now, with children and grandchildren involved, and being apprenticeships, that was their schooling, that was their learning with their mothers, they became very skilled in the brewing crafts themselves. So this resulted in more brewed product being made, greater distribution as well. And this did mean more income, well, at least more gain somehow through their trading from the family. And do we have something on that? Yeah, there we go. So you got into this situation, all the family moved in. So you got a place that was really became quite a bit of a crack, didn't it? Now, from the rough, so you got this thing from the rough wicker and cob lodges they were born into. They upgraded into log cabins and maybe cob cabins, even stone one. And the labours of the whole family enabled rewards that came from all that, and that enabled investment into secure, established bars and taverns, very advanced for that time. So the ale housewife's children, they grew from being apprentices in very rustic conditions into becoming very well-established crafted brewers in quite classy premises, while their mothers, the children and grandchildren ended up doing the brewing tasks. They ended up making the brews, clearing the floors and all that. They were the ones with the brooms because their mothers were there just in charge of sales and managing the larger ale houses. So they were very much as managers and organizers, much more than being involved in the brewing. And as the children and grandchildren grew older and became adults and had learned the alehouse trade, this also helped them to escape living servitude lifestyles, especially for the daughters. Now, the alehouse women's offspring, they eventually left the mothers, obviously, and they would go off and they would create their own independent alehouses to create their own independent lives. And their mothers encouraged this, I'm sure, and with support. It's all part of the expanded family business. And this increased revenue from the alehouse, thanks to all the extra family labours. That actually was when this enabled mothers to actually have enough resources to actually pay for help, pay for staff. They managed to get staff outside of the family because in exchange for the help, they were able to feed other families. There was more than enough for their own families to get some more help in. We'll pay you. We'll get you out of your servitude. We can help you establish jobs that can, and in return, I'll give you some food, perhaps construction of shelter, all these sort of rewards as payment for the help. Now, the acceleration, all of this through medieval times, that's what I was saying, medieval momentum. There was this acceleration from that basic trade of the little hut by the spring and the simple brews, maybe not so simple, but all in the cauldron. There's acceleration of this trade and income, lots of cauldrons going on. And that, you could probably say, is wealth, all this acceleration. And these alehouse wives, it wasn't instant. We're talking about 1,000 years, from about 5th century to 15th century. So it was a slow acceleration towards this sort of wealth situation. It wasn't like today when you can have an idea, especially with a digital idea, and you become $1 million revenue within months, maybe a year. So the wealth from early medieval alehouse startups may not have been realized until the brewery had passed through several generations of descendants. So we're talking about not only the children, but the grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc., before this wealth built up. So, as I say, medieval age, 5th century, 15th century, the growth of enterprise was not the eventual living luxury for all alehouse wives. Now, the main intent before profit and wealth for these alehouse wives, really, it never changed. It was all about independence and freedom from any threat of slavery. That was the number one agenda. That's how it appears to be from the stories and what I discovered. The wealth was kind of a side effect of the expansion and the demand for their services and product. So during the early medieval 5th century times, it's likely hardly any alehouse wives developed far beyond their wicker domes, other than perhaps cobbing them or upgrading to wooden huts. But the first very established church monastic communities, such as the British one in Kildare of 5th century onwards, it seems the main intent of the monastic communities was to establish scriptoriums to produce scribed works, because scribed works was an immense wealth-creating activity of the time. There's a carving of a scribe there. But the scriptorium industry seemed to take 300 years or more to really get going. So that wasn't a big wealth thing in early medieval times. Certainly the patriarchal culture was sort of present during that medieval time. It wasn't such a big deal. There was an attempt, but it seems that at least half of the women, even at that time, because of this patriarchal influence, maybe came over with the Romans, certainly with the Normans. Well, Normans is a lot later, and they did come in a bit with the Saxons when they converted to Christianity. This whole Norse thing of treating them like goddesses kind of changed a bit over time. Because there was concern about who had control of property, who had rulership over land and property, and women were getting less and less rights for this. So it's all about protecting their independence. By the 5th century, the patriarchal command was not really a threat upon the alehouse women and their enterprises. The trading environment, though, changed in small ways from about the 7th century. Major culture shifts were going on then. And because by the 7th century, the scribing industry was rebuilding again, because between the 5th and 7th century, 6th century was a massive time of plagues, what we would perhaps call endemics. It wasn't like getting rid of it in a year or two like we're trying to do now. The endemics, they're 50 years or so. And the worst hit were the monastic communities. They would be totally wiped out. On this island that's now Ireland, it was said more than 40% of the population was wiped out by these plagues and endemics. So huge effect when people are wiped out. And of course, it probably would have been battling as well. So developments in people being scholarly and learning how to scribe would have been very limited. But it all came together in the 7th century. And so there was an acceleration of new culture then, acceleration of new human lifestyles. What were known as Gaels in the 5th century were people of the woods. Suddenly, Gaels were the scholastic people. That's what it meant. Then Gaelic people were the educated people that were in the scribing or something associated, higher ranks in the monastic culture, in the monastic communities. So human lifestyles and values were changing fast. And then by the 9th century, this was about halfway through medieval times, changes really increased in speed in comparison. And at this time, the patriarchal boys' clubs were really coming together. Stuff like this. This is perhaps a bit later with the way they're dressed there. But not too much different, because the whole tailoring industry was starting to take off then as well. And sort of men's fashions was starting to happen around the 9th century, I gather. And these patriarchal boys' clubs, the guilds, as we call them, very much affiliated with the churches and church organizations. They were growing at the 9th century. They were becoming very influential. And this also includes them getting together and developing their doctrines, their dogmas, which was supposed to interpret their stances of morality. A bit similar to the health and safety people that we have today, the doctrines that they enforce. And of course, the thing was, 7th and 9th century, they claimed that everything that they were teaching came from the scriptures. They also claimed that it was from what was scribed in the 5th century, which is absolute nonsense. It was just something to validate what they were saying, because you couldn't do a validation on something that was modern. You had to go back into history to validate something. We still do that today, don't we? Anyways, most people, even by the 9th century, they couldn't read the scriptures yet for themselves. So these guild men, they couldn't be argued with. If they said it was in the scriptures, you believed it was, or they did. And because they were the gatekeepers of the so-called then the holy scripts. And so also around the 9th century, there were also many more alehouse wives that had expanded and were moving on to larger premises. So everything was going very well for the alehouse wives in the 9th century. And many more of these women's alehouses were taverns, large taverns. They were hosting overnight inn services. And in England, there were still pubs that are still open today that started with this heritage. Let's give you some examples. This is the ferry boat in by the River Cam. It's in Cambridgeshire. That has a 6th century origin. There's the Ye Olde Fighting Cock in St Albans, appropriate name, I suppose. That dates back to the 8th century. There's the Porch House in Cheltenham. This is 10th century origin. They're obviously rebuilt. And the Bingley Arms in Leeds, very similar, and that's also 10th century as well. And now in Wales, the oldest existing pub is the Sgurries. It's north of Abergeni. I haven't got a picture of the pub, but that's this hanging sign. That's 11th century. That was run by women initially, but men took it over in the 6th century, and it doubled up as a courthouse when they actually took it over. And guess what it was a courthouse for? I'll talk about that next week. Scotland, strangely, doesn't seem to have any existing medieval pubs. Perhaps you know them. I've never found them. But come over to Ireland, the most famous one is Sean's Bar. This is in Athlone. Started up by an alehouse woman in the 10th century. Then it got handed over to men again, 16th century. And even Boy George owned it for a while. It's still a terrific pub to visit, well worth if you're going through Athlone, if you're visiting Ireland, get in Sean's Bar. It's a great crack as well. Now, perhaps the most famous one in Ireland is Caitella's Inn. It's in Kilkenny, very much worth a mention. And I'm really going to delve into some of the next week's stuff on this one anyway. Is Caitella's. Yes, okay. Eventually we'll get Caitella's. There we go. And that was established by an alehouse woman called Alice. Excuse me. And she was daughter of an immigrant Norman banker. She opened up this alehouse in 1263. And there's no, that's inside the alehouse. Well, we'll show that. That's what it's like if you go to it now. And there's a statue of Alice. There she is, the alehouse woman with her broom. There's Alice. And guess what? She was accused of witchcraft. That's what she's famous, but there she is. She's in a trial, arguing a case, against these men. A couple of them looking very scared of her, what she had to say anyway. But unfortunately, Alice, poor Alice, she was actually the first woman to be burned at the stake as a witch in Ireland on 3rd of November, 1324. Sad ending, of course. And this was before any women had been burned at the stake in Britain. I'm not sure how it is in relation to the Germans, because the Germans were really hot on it. But Alice in Ireland, she was found guilty of cutting up animals and placing their meat for the devil at crossroads, and also having a lover called Robert or Robin Artisan, who was believed to be the son of the devil. Also, a third thing she was accused of was making love potions that corrupted the purity of Christians. Anyway, W.B. Yeats, he actually wrote a poem that included Alice, and I'll see if I can bring it up for you. Now, let's see if there he goes. 1919 comes to mind. The lurches past his great eyes without thought. Under the shadows of straw, pale locks, that insolent fiend Robert Artisan, to whom love-torn lady Caitella brought bronze peacock feathers, red combs of her cocks. There's also a movie scripted and acted by Ashley Judd, and she actually takes on the role of Lady Alice. The film is called Burning Time. It was made 16 years ago now. They say I'll be released next year, so I'm looking forward to that. Lady Alice with Ashley Judd. They're about okay, tell us. That's it, about Alice anyway. So that's really moving into a bit of next week, telling you about Alice. The Patriarchal Church Guild and Secret Society men, actually 10th, 11th century, 12th century, especially onwards, they're becoming very impatient with the success of these alehouse women. It was really challenging what they felt was their right to commerce. Anyway, before we move on the rest, do you have any questions or comments? Or I'm on to the last leg of this now, because I said I'm trying to get this within the hour. Any more from you? Not at the moment. Anyway, you're all listening patiently. There's no doubt that brewing had defined human power through really the late 800 years from now. Human history has really been dictated by the power of brewing. Brewing has ruled so much. Let's see if I got something to... there we go. Brewing, the power of brewing. There we go. That's from the Egyptians. Never mind. We'll leave that one alone. And throughout the world, ale brewing has often been defined. Well, the brewing itself, what a tribe, what a culture brews, it defines that tribe and culture. It also eventually defined a nation. Look at Guinness and Ireland for a start. But is nationalism fiction? That's another matter. I'll talk about brewing and nationalism next Sunday during the third part of this series. The alehouse women, they slowly earned revered status positions, of course. But sadly, that position that the brewing women, the alehouse wives, had established with their communities, with their tribe, with their culture, that actually started to decline very rapidly through the so-called Christian conversion. So that's all I'm going to be covering for part 2 of this Witches, Cauldron Ale series. As I say, there's a part 3 conclusion. That's going to be next Sunday at 4 p.m. Irish time. And through this concluding part 1, I'm going to be covering things like the effect of the tougher doctrine orders by these Christian guilds upon the alehouse women. This is through the late medieval feudalism years. I'll be talking about the feudalism as well. I'll be talking very much what was happening after the 12th century, how it slowly became worse to very difficult and life-threatening for many women in brewing over the 400 years from the 12th century. Also, how and why alehouse women became branded as witches. I got some picture on that one. You know, this is the sort of thing that that was what was imagined. There was propaganda that went out. The your alehouse woman isn't what she appears to be. This is what she is. That was the propaganda that was put out. Persecution of these alehouse women. I'll talk about that and their families who were branded as witches, and how most of the alehouse women actually were resilient. There was a lot of women that were resilient, and they got through this. They got, you hear the bad stories of this, but I'm going to tell you some of the good stories, and especially about the highly intelligent, incredibly wise German nun, St. Hildegard of Bingen, and how she changed the brewing landscape for alehouse women. And there's a bit of a clue of what I'm going to be talking about then. And also how and why brewing industry of the last 300 years has been more associated with men rather than women. But I'll also move on to the present, to where our alehouse women traditions seem to be very much alive. They're again, and they're growing in South America, which I sneaked up. That's not South America, but in Africa. That's a sort of primitive form, but the women and the alehouse women tradition, it's really starting to grow again in South Africa, also in South America, and here in Nepal. There's an alehouse woman in Nepal, rural Nepal. So I'm going to close as well next. I'm going to close with the ideas and examples of how women today are identifying themselves with how they interpret witches and witchery now. And there's a bit of a poster that I think explains a bit of the modern imagery of being a witch today. And I'll be using that, and along with healing and care practices, rather than just talk about alehouse brewing. So I'll be bringing this up certainly next week in part 3. There's a few comments coming up. Let's see. There's Amy. I look forward to the good stories, says Amy Dixon. And the politics never change. Yeah, I think that's what I'm kind of illustrating that along, and you'll find incredible connections. Yeah, what we're going through now, it's not, especially poor women. It hasn't changed. It's all covered up, isn't it? And you got this, the whole Taliban situation, and in a more subtle way, is everywhere. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, keeping this Nature Folklore show financially afloat, thanks to our subscribers. And again, that's the main subscriber link. If you prefer to use a card, a regular card, I've got the Buy Me a Coffee. I'll scroll that there for a few seconds again. $1 a pound or euro a week help goes a long way to keeping this show afloat, with several of you helping out. So thank you if you can help with that. Thank you very much. So coming up, Nature Folklore Sessions. There's some good stuff. Of course, there is good stuff. There's always good stuff. As I say, next week we got the part 3 of the. There we go. I'll bring that up. The Hedge Witch again. Cauldrons Ale series, Witch into Healing. That's good to bring that up again for that. And the 16th of October, it's I go into the serpent folklore, bringing up to Sawan there, serpent and dragons. And that's when we'll really start getting some guests on board. Now, one I'm very looking forward to is on the 23rd of October. Let the Water Speak. It's a new one for me on Nature Folklore. But part of that is we're actually going to have man called Magan. He's going to be a guest talking about his new book that's released in a few days, Listen to the Land Speak. So that's very special for Nature Folklore to have that incredible author, Mankan Magan. I'll have to learn to pronounce his... it's because I'm at the end of the show. Mankan Magan. That's who he is. Be talking about his book, Listen to the Land Speak. And he's really pushing that. The previous books he's brought out very quietly, but this one is very enthusiastic. He's really using the media, and I'm putting his glorious videos onto my Facebook as well. Also, don't forget, 7 p.m. Thursdays Irish time. It's Holy World's Revival editions that I'm trying to keep to 30 minutes maximum, half the time of this if I can. And next Wednesday, I've moved it to Wednesdays, which is 7 p.m. Irish time. I'm going to be covering cauldrons and rags, the rag trees and cauldrons. And I think if I got time, I'll talk a little bit about a couple of County Leitrim wells as well. There's a couple more comments coming up as well. And what we got? The names Anne Baker. What were the names? Anne Baker Jean, something like that. I'm a feminist. Jane says I'm a feminist. I'm in for equality, Jane. I'm not. Oh, dear. Perhaps it's a shame I'm not doing distilling, and I've covered that as well. It's always said that the little boys years ago they used to wear skirts because there's this story. The fairies would come in the night, and they would. Of course, this was a Christian thing as well. They would actually come into the cottage of the night, and they would take the baby sons away off the fairyland, and they would actually replace them with a sickly child. Yeats's Stolen Child is roughly about that. And so the boys would used to go to school in skirts, especially the sons of the distillers. And I assume it might be the same for the brewers as well, so that they wouldn't be taken away with the fairies. I found that hilarious because how long have boys been wearing shorts and trousers anyway? So that's an intriguing thing. Anyway, feminist equality, Jane, total equality, balancing that. That's my intention here. Right, the witch aesthetics. Let's see if I can get back on the picture that you're talking about, Kate. There we go. It was a really because the where was it? Was it? No, it wasn't this one. Was it the names of them? No, no. Is that what you were looking for? I don't know. Is it that one? I'm going to be bringing that and talking that one out. It's interesting. The middle one, obviously, is a relation of mine. Hedgewich. I don't think I can't see. There was one I had names earlier. Maybe I hope that's the one you're talking about. Talking about as well. Let's try and relieve that one for now. Anyway, I hope that's what you were saying, Jane. Is that the one? That's what push for equality. Yeah, it's the lack of slave. It's not so much equality as well. It's the whole slavery that. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I won't visit the pyramids, actually, in Egypt. I don't think I ever will in my life. Got no interest. Because to me, that's what a pyramid defines. You got everyone's trying to reach to the top of the pinnacle. I go for circles. Anything that circles, spirals, or in waves. I kind of support that, but I get very uncomfortable in pyramid situations because to me, how those pyramids were built is one thing you can't get around it. There's definitely some huge ego there, some huge positioning that is enforced slavery. That's my opinion. Anyway, thanks. Sorry we didn't have any guests today, but I've gone over the hour anyway. If you're watching this as an archive, please keep commenting here because I do come back from time to time, look at your comments and make my comments and answer your questions. Click the subscribe button as well, especially YouTube. Also, do me a favor, please, and go over the Holy Wells Revival channel. Seek that on YouTube if you can. I'm still trying to get that properly registered. I think I need about another 30 subscribes there to get that done. Highly appreciate that if you can do that. So enjoy a safe week or a safe few days. Maybe I'll see some of you on Wednesday on Holy Wells Revival. Otherwise, part 3 of the which is Cauldrons Ale next Sunday. So until then, be well, look after yourself, remain healthy, enjoy your cauldrons, and enjoy your inspirations from whatever you do. I think that's all I got. Thanks very much. Bye, and thank you so much for watching. And let's hope my mouse works now. So that's it. Bye-bye.